The Lord of the Hidden Chamber. Narrated by NightFox Tale. There was once a woman who married a ghost. She knelt before a tomb, spoke her vows to the dead, and became the wife of a man who no longer existed. But she could not have known the truth. She did not know why the lord of the castle had truly taken her as a daughter-in-law. She did not know the blood-soaked secret that the great stone walls of that estate were hiding. And she did not know that the man they said was dead was alive and breathing in a dark, sealed chamber deep within those very walls, more fiercely alive than anyone she had ever met. This is the story of a woman who fell in love with the son of the man who destroyed her family. It is a strange and sorrowful record of fate. Welcome, everyone. This is NightFox Tale, where the most haunting and tender stories of the night find their voice. Tonight, I bring you the tale of a woman who entered this world as the wife of the dead, and became everything to a man who was very much alive. Your likes and comments mean the world to this storyteller. Now, let us begin. It was an unusually bitter winter, somewhere in the kingdom. In the heart of the capital, a dark rumor began to spread from the estate of Lord Cedric, a man celebrated as the most loyal nobleman in the realm. The rumor was this: he intended to bring a living woman into his household to wed his son who was already dead and buried. A ghost wedding. A ceremony in which the living bowed before the remains of the dead. The city was in an uproar. People shook their heads. "What madness has come over that noble house?" they whispered. But Lord Cedric did not flinch. He was a man cold and unyielding enough to brush the world's judgment aside like dust from his boot. The only question was, who would be the woman placed upon that grim altar? Elara's family had been broken by the autumn winds of that same year. For generations, her house had stood for honest service and integrity. But her father's uprightness became his undoing. He was snared in a trap of false accusations, caught in a single forged letter that named him a traitor. In one night, the family's lands were seized, and her father was thrown into the dungeon. He was released 3 months later. But what walked out was not the man who had gone in. It was a hollow shell, a withered tree with no roots left. He lay bedridden, coughing up blood. Elara kept vigil at his side through every night. The refined hands of a nobleman's daughter grew raw from washing and mending. The cost of medicine gnawed at what little sleep she had. It was at the peak of that terrible winter, when poverty tightened its grip around her throat, that Lord Cedric's man came to find her. "The Lord requests your presence." The drawing room where she met Lord Cedric was heavy with silence. The Lord studied her without a word. His gaze was not that of a man taking pity on a struggling woman. It was the gaze of a craftsman testing the temper of a blade. Elara did not look away. She had nothing left to lose. Fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. "They said you were composed and discreet. Your eyes are steady. Your bearing is good. You will do." Lord Cedric spoke slowly and quietly. "My son is dead. There is no heir, no one to carry on the family name. I wish to hold a wedding in his honor, so that his spirit may find rest." Elara listened in silence. But something felt wrong. A father who had lost his son should have had grief in his eyes. Instead, Lord Cedric's gaze held something calculating and sharp. He looked like a merchant about to close a deal. Elara said nothing. "In return, I can offer you something. Your father will have medicine and care for the rest of his life. And the false charge of treason against him will be cleared. Your family's honor will be restored." Elara's fingertips trembled slightly. The image of her father crossed her mind. "There is one more thing." Lord Cedric looked directly at her and spoke in a low, deliberate voice. "When the winds of the kingdom change, I will place you at the side of the one who will rule this land. A world far wider than what you have lost will be laid at your feet." Elara felt it in her bones. This was not a marriage. It was a transaction. She was walking alive into an enormous trap. But there was nowhere to turn back to. Nothing left to lean on. "Before I take you as a daughter-in-law, there are conditions you must swear to uphold." Lord Cedric's voice dropped lower. "First, you will never enter any part of the estate I have not permitted. Second, whatever you see or hear within these walls, you will carry to your grave." "Which parts of the estate are forbidden?" "The study, and the darkness beyond it." The old lord's excuse was that he had not been able to clear out his dead son's belongings. It sounded reasonable enough, but something far deeper and far more dangerous lurked behind his eyes. Elara knew it. She nodded anyway. "I swear it." A faint shadow passed across Lord Cedric's lips. Was it relief? Or was it the pity of a man watching a lamb step willingly into the pen? The wedding was unnervingly quiet. No music, no guests, no celebration. In that hollow silence, Elara knelt in her bridal gown, before a cold stone marker carved with the name, Sir Aldrich. The candlelight cast trembling shadows across the red pigment on her cheeks. As she bowed to the empty air, a sudden chill crawled across her skin. It felt as though someone, somewhere in that room, was watching her. After the ceremony, Elara was left alone in the bridal chamber. It had been prepared in the far wing of the estate. That night, she learned for the first time that it shared a wall with the forbidden study. A wedding night without a groom. Only the candle burned beside her, quietly eating itself away. Then it happened. A thud, low and distant, from somewhere deep in the darkness beyond the study. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. And then, something she could not dismiss as wind. It was a man's breath. Hot and rough and alive. Elara stopped breathing. The candle shuddered. The sound did not come only that one night. Every night, at the same hour. The darkness on the other side of that wall breathed. The sound was like a heartbeat. Every night that Lord Cedric moved in and out of the study. The low, rhythmic thuds followed. It was unmistakably the sound of a living creature. Night after night, it ate away at Elara's sleep. Her suspicion hardened into certainty. To pretend not to know that someone is alive is its own kind of betrayal. On the 21st day, her chance came. Lord Cedric had ridden to the castle to attend the king. And the manor was his no more that afternoon. Elara slipped quietly into the drawing room. She searched the drawers. She checked the pouches hanging on the wall. And at last she found it. A single worn iron key. The only passage to the forbidden. When she opened the study door, the smell of ink and damp dust poured out to meet her. She moved slowly through the room. Bookshelves packed tight with volumes. A writing table set with order. And along one entire wall, another bookshelf. But something was wrong. Every other shelf was filled with dust. That one was clean. Someone had been passing through it regularly. Elara reached out and pressed her hand to the side of the shelf. She pushed. With a soft creak, a hidden passage opened its mouth. The passage was dark and long. She pressed one hand to the wall and moved forward, guided by a single candle. Her own heartbeat sounded like thunder in her ears. At the far end of the passage, a heavy door appeared. It had a lock on the outside. This was not a door meant to protect whoever was within. It was a door meant to seal someone inside forever. Click. The lock gave way with a sound like a gasp. Before the light could even reach inside, something shot out of the darkness like lightning. Oh! A rough hand seized her by the throat and wrist at the same moment. Elara was slammed against the wall before she could scream. The candle rolled across the floor. Its flickering light swept across the room in strange and jagged shapes. A man stood before her. He was enormous, tall and broad-shouldered, with pale skin and muscle. Built hard over years of solitary training. His dark hair was wild. His eyes, gleaming between the tangled strands, were sharp as a starving wolf's. He thrust his face close to hers, and she felt him draw in a slow breath, as though taking stock of what he had caught. Elara's own breath was shaking, but she did not close her eyes. She looked straight back at him. For a moment, something shifted in the man's expression. He had expected the woman to crumble. Instead, she was looking at him with wide, clear, utterly steady eyes. The man squeezed her wrist and growled low. "Where did you get that key?" "I stole it." A beat of silence. His eyes narrowed. His grip loosened, just slightly, as though the answer had caught him off guard. "Who sent you? Are you here to kill me?" Elara answered without wavering. "I did not even know anyone was in here. I only heard a sound. Every night, from within this darkness. The hot, rough breathing of someone alive. I heard it for 20 nights. I could not keep pretending I hadn't." The man stared down at her face for a long moment. His raw heat and breath pressed close to her cheek. Something behind his eyes shifted, weighing and measuring. At last, he released her and turned away coldly. "Leave." Elara did not move. "Are you him, Sir Aldrich? Are you the one whose name is on that stone?" The man's shoulders went rigid. He did not turn around. He said flatly, with finality, "I said leave." Neither a yes nor a no. Elara pulled the door closed. Just before it shut, she spoke quietly to the man's back in the dark. "I will come back tomorrow." And she did. The next day. And the day after that. Beyond the hidden bookshelf, through the dark passage, past the locked door, was the man's room. A chamber without bars, yet a prison all the same. And beyond a second door at the back of his room lay a small enclosed courtyard, hidden entirely by high stone walls and invisible from outside. It was the only space the world had left him. It was the only world he had. Aldrich was moving through exercises in the courtyard when she arrived. Under a narrow strip of sky, his movements were nonetheless sweeping and fluid. When Elara stepped inside, he stopped and said coldly, "I did not tell you to leave permanently." "Yes. That is why I came back today." Aldrich stared at her briefly. Then, saying nothing more, he returned to his exercises. He could neither drive her out nor simply ignore her. Elara sat quietly to one side and watched him. Aldrich treated her like a ghost, pouring his sweat into the stone floor. When he finally came inside, Toweling off his face, he moved to pass her. Elara reached out first. "May I wash the towel for you?" Aldrich stopped. As Elara reached to take it, her fingers brushed the back of his hand. His skin was burning. Her fingertips trembled. His whole body locked up like stone. He said nothing, snatched the towel back, and turned away. But Elara did not miss it. The tips of his ears had gone red. On the third day, Aldrich was the first to break the silence. Without lifting his eyes from the book in his hands, he said, "Why do you keep coming here? To this cramped, damp little place?" "I just wanted to. Because there is someone here." Aldrich closed the book then, and looked at her. His eyes were searching for a hidden motive. But he found only clear and honest sincerity. He looked away again. This time, he did not say leave. As Elara rose to go, Aldrich asked quietly, "What is the world like today?" Elara paused and looked back at him. Aldrich kept his eyes on the book, feigning indifference. But his ears were listening with everything he had. "Do you mean the news from the kingdom? Or the gossip from the village?" He hesitated a moment, then murmured, "Both." Elara sat back down, and smiled gently. "Then I will stay a little longer. I will tell you about the smell of stew from the market. And the sound of children laughing over the garden wall. And everything that happened in every courtyard in the village today." One evening, Lord Cedric sat across from Elara. Elara looked up. The Lord's eyes met hers over the rim of the cup, sharp and cold as a blade. "You have not forgotten your oath." "I have not, my lord." Elara lowered her head quietly. But the Lord stared at her for a long time. It was not a simple warning. It was the relentless scrutiny of a man checking whether his daughter-in-law's hem had picked up any unfamiliar dust. "Do not go near that part of the house again." Elara answered with a deeper bow rather than words. And in that moment, she was certain. The more tightly Lord Cedric locked that door, the more surely the man on the other side was waiting for someone. Waiting for her. That night, Elara slipped back into the study. But the lock had been changed. The key did not even fit the hole. It was the Lord's silent punishment. She did not give up. For days, she moved through the estate. Like a shadow, following the Lord's every step. She listened for the jingle of the key ring, hidden inside his sleeve each time he entered the study. On the fifth day, while he stepped away briefly, she took the new key. Her palm was cold with sweat. But the hand holding the key did not tremble. A week later, the door opened again. Aldrich was in the courtyard, working through his forms. When he sensed Elara's presence, the tip of his sword wavered for just one instant. Then it cut through the air again with terrifying precision. He acted as though she were not there. Elara sat quietly on the step and waited. The heat rose from his body and the sweat fell to the stone. Only when he finally came inside and dropped onto the wall did she speak. "The lock was changed. That is why I was late. I did not choose to stay away." Aldrich said nothing. When Elara rose to leave, she said, "I will be going now." As she turned, Aldrich spoke to the wall. "How did you get the key?" "I stole it again." A short silence. Aldrich turned his head and looked at her for the first time. Something passed across his face, somewhere between disbelief and incredulity. Then his eyes dropped. "Next time, bring something to eat." Elara pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. Yes. From that day on, she came every day. Aldrich was still quiet, still expressionless. But he stopped telling her to leave. For Elara, that was enough. One afternoon, she spoke carefully. May I ask you something? Aldrich did not lift his eyes from his book. Why are you here? Why are you locked away like this? Aldrich paused. Then he said simply, The Lord hid me. Because I am someone who is not supposed to be alive. Elara asked nothing more, but his words circled in her mind for a very long time. In one corner of Aldrich's small courtyard, there was a modest garden patch. It crouched low against the ground, barely catching the broken light that filtered in. Aldrich had broken and tended the earth himself, with those large rough hands. A few unnamed weeds, and one flower, barely clinging to life in a shadowed corner. Elara looked at these small, stubborn, living things for a long time, then asked quietly, Did you tend this yourself? Aldrich looked away, affecting indifference, and said gruffly, When you are alone, there is nothing else to do. Elara crouched down without a word, and began pulling weeds from around the flower with her bare hands. Aldrich watched her from above. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to his knees beside her. And he laid his hand gently over hers. I will do it. Low words, barely spoken, but he did not move his hand away. And Elara did not pull hers back. The two of them crouched together in the thin morning light, clearing the earth in silence. One morning, the flower finally opened. Elara smiled brightly and pointed to it. Look, my lord. It has bloomed at last. Aldrich came out slowly and stood before the flower. Those rough, calloused hands, worn harder than the petals before him. He studied it for a long moment. The hard set of his eyes softened, just barely, and a quiet breath escaped him. Spring has truly come. He did not mean only the season. He meant that warmth had crept into this sealed room. He meant that a flower had bloomed here, and her name was Elara. Warm morning light settled between their two pairs of shoes, side by side on the step. It was a night in the rainy season. Elara woke to thunder shaking the rafters and found herself walking toward the study with the key in her hand. As though pulled by something she could not name. Inside the sealed chamber, Aldrich sat in a corner in the dark, no candle lit. Are you all right? Aldrich looked at her slowly. His expression was different. Something that should have been firmly shut had come slightly open. Elara went to him and sat quietly at his side. After a long while, Aldrich spoke in a low, unsteady voice. When I was young, there was a woman who looked after me. It was a night like this one, with rain just like this. She had fallen ill. I was in this room and there was nothing I could do. I knocked on the door. I knocked for a long time. But no one opened it outside of the appointed hours. When the Lord finally came, his voice broke. Elara waited. She was already cold. Elara's eyes burned. She could see, inside this enormous man, a small child who was still crying. A child who had knocked and knocked on a door no one would open. She laid her hand quietly on his arm. I am here. Aldrich went still. Then, slowly, he leaned his forehead against her shoulder. Like a tree that had stood too long, yielding at last to the wind. His breath warmed the side of her neck. Hot and unsteady, he pressed his face deeper against her shoulder. and his lips were nearly at her throat. "You smell like yourself. Not like rain. Like you." Elara held her breath. Each time his breath brushed her throat, her heart did something she could not explain. "Do not go. Just for tonight." Elara put her hand on his back, and she began to tell a story, one her father used to tell her. Speaking low and slow, laying her voice on top of the sound of the rain. Aldrich's breathing gradually steadied, but Elara's heart did not settle for a long time after. At first light, Elara pushed the door open to find Aldrich standing in the middle of the courtyard, staring up at the empty sky. The rain had washed the night clean. The raw confession that had poured out of him in the dark seemed to have been swept away with it, but the way he looked at her when she entered was not the same as it had been before. The iron in him had cracked. Just a thin line, but it was there. Elara broke the quiet and asked softly, "Would it be all right if I called you my lord?" Aldrich's gaze flickered. He turned to look at something in the corner of the courtyard, cleared his throat, and said flatly, "Do as you like." It was offhand. It was meant to sound careless. But Elara knew. This man who had lived his whole life, armed and on guard, this was the warmest and most earnest permission he knew how to give. From that day forward, something invisible began to build between them. Aldrich still said little. His face still rarely moved. But when he heard her footsteps approaching, his hands moved to close his book more quickly than they needed to. When she rose to leave, his eyes followed the hem of her dress with a longing he could not quite hide. One evening at sunset, just as Elara turned to say goodbye, Aldrich's hand shot out and caught her by the wrist. The same rough hand that had shoved her against the wall the night they first met. But it was not the same. The strength in his grip was just as fierce. But it was not violence. It was desperation. The desperate hold of someone terrified of losing something they know they will never find again. He could not bring himself to look at her. He stared at the courtyard, drenched in the last red light of the day. The silence was dense. Then a cracked voice came from between his lips. "Stay. Just a little longer." Not an order. Not a threat. A plea, raw and unguarded. The first time in his life he had ever asked anyone for anything. Elara sat back down as though drawn by something she could not resist. Aldrich pulled her hand slowly onto his knee. His broad, hot palm covered the back of her hand. They sat like that together, hands folded over each other, watching the flower in the courtyard sway in the evening light. Lord Cedric had the instincts of a hunting dog. It did not take him long to notice where his daughter-in-law's feet tended to turn, or whose warmth her eyes were chasing. He said nothing. He only tightened the net. During the day, servants watched Elara like shadows. At night, every corridor leading to the study was bolted shut. She felt like a prisoner inside a cage with no visible bars. But she did not break. She found the gaps in the watch and got hold of the key again. And there, in the cold dark of the forbidden study, she came face to face with a truth written in blood. At the back of a deep drawer, inside a bundle of faded documents, she found a draft petition bearing her father's name. The handwriting that had condemned him to a charge of treason was unmistakably Lord Cedric's. Her family's ruin had not been an accident. It had been a trap, engineered with precision by the master of this very house. Elara took the document in trembling hands and walked to the Lord's study. Something colder than fury had settled over her entire body. "My lord, I must speak with you." The hand that held out the document was shaking. Lord Cedric looked it over. He did not flee. He did not deny it. He looked directly at Elara. "Yes, I did it. Why? My father served honestly his whole life." Lord Cedric opened his mouth slowly. "Your father was too upright. If I had left him alone, he would have been the first to discover what this house conceals. And he would have reported it to the crown. What does this house conceal?" The Lord was quiet for a moment. Then he began, at last, to give voice to the secret. He had carried alone for decades. The late king had a son by a servant woman. But the moment that child's existence became known, every man who coveted the throne would have reached for his throat. Those who had already chosen their preferred successor found the true bloodline nothing but a dangerous obstacle. The king knew this. He could not announce the child. He could only pass me a single sealed letter before he died. Elara could barely breathe. The boy's mother died in childbirth. The king never held his son. I received that letter and fixed on one single purpose. This child had to survive. So you made him appear to be dead. At first, I raised him as my own. But as the boy grew, he came to look so much like the late king that I could no longer hide him from the world's eyes. I staged a death for him, held a funeral, and then buried him in the deepest part of this house to wait for the right moment." Elara's eyes shook. "Then Aldrich is of royal blood. His true surname is not mine. It is the surname of the royal house, the blood of kings. I gave him my name to keep him hidden. His true name was never meant to be spoken aloud." Elara could not speak for a long time. The name she had whispered since the day she knelt before that stone marker. The name she had been calling him all along. Even that had not been real. Then why the ghost wedding? Why bring me into this house? For the first time, something in Lord Cedric's eyes moved. A dead man's widow draws no suspicion. The world would see only a grieving young woman keeping the household in order. It was the only way I could place someone at his side. Why me? A family with power cannot keep a secret. But a woman of no standing cannot stand beside him when the time comes. I needed a woman of noble blood, who had fallen, someone with nowhere to go back to, no one to depend on. And he stopped. After his nurse died, the boy collapsed. He needed warmth, the kind I could not give him. I brought you here to keep him alive. He paused again, then added quietly. I did not expect you to open the door yourself. I had planned to send you in when the time was right. But you were faster. Elara swallowed the sob rising in her throat. All of it had been designed from the beginning. Her father's ruin, the ghost wedding, her arrival in this house. Your father's life was my greatest sin. Lord Cedric dropped to his knees before Elara. Take my life whenever you wish. But protect my son. He has no one left but you. Elara stared at him for a long time. He was her enemy. He had destroyed everything she had. But those knees on the floor, those eyes before her, did not belong to the villain she had imagined. She broke. A sob tore out of her and filled the room. She pressed her fists against the floor and wept like something wounded. When the storm in her finally stilled, Elara wiped her face. Something cold and clear had settled over her expression. She straightened her dress and looked at him directly. Forgiveness? No, I will not forgive you, not even in death. I will carry this grief and this anger for the rest of my life. But I will stay at his side. Not because you command it. Because I chose it, out of my own pity for a man who spent his life silent in the dark. I will use the life you shattered to keep him alive myself. So watch closely, my lord. Watch how I protect him. The next day, Elara went to Aldrich. He was in the courtyard with his sword when she arrived. He stopped when he felt her presence. Elara told him everything without softening a single word. Lord Cedric was the one who betrayed my father. Bringing me here was planned from the start. And now I know who you truly are. Aldrich's eyes fractured. Elara added quietly, so I am not certain whether I should leave. Aldrich looked at her for a long moment. Then, with a voice that cut like cold iron, he said, "Leave." Elara went still. Would you truly be all right if I did? I would be fine. We are not truly husband and wife. That strange ceremony meant nothing. The words hit her like something sharp. She knew they were not honest. She knew they were the twisted form of care that a man takes when he looks at the life he has damaged and cannot bear the sight of it. That was why it hurt more. Elara turned and walked away. Not until her footsteps had faded completely from the passage did Aldrich move. He sank to the floor where he stood, and closed his eyes. He told himself this was how he saved her. But something in his chest had been cut out, and he could not get any air. Elara was ill for 3 days and 3 nights. For the first 2, she packed and repacked her few belongings. But what finally stopped her hands was not guilt over her father. It was an ache she had no name for. A thought of Aldrich left alone, slowly withering in that dry room with no one's warmth. On the 5th day, she walked back into the dark passage. Lord Cedric was standing at the entrance like a ghost. The shoulders of a man who had never once appeared to waver were, for the first time, trembling slightly. "Go in." His voice was cracked and dry as parched earth. Elara entered the room. She pressed her hand to Aldrich's forehead. The heat that surged through her palm was like touching a flame. "My lord, stay with me." Aldrich opened his eyes, barely. His gaze drifted before finding her face. "What a stubborn dream. Still showing you to me. This is not a dream. I am right here." Aldrich's hand shot out and seized her wrist. The explosive force of the first night was gone. But the grip was just as unyielding. Every knuckle stood out. Every bone spoke of the refusal to let go. "Do not leave, please. Elara. Without you, I cannot breathe." Her eyes went hot. "You told me to leave, and yet here you are frightened." "Why?" "Because you belong in the light. I cannot let you become ash, trapped in a darkness like mine. I am already lost in your darkness. Not because of you. Because my heart chose it." Elara lifted his head and rested it in her lap. Like a child, he brought her hand to his cheek. His burning skin and her cool fingers pressed together. And he exhaled a long breath of relief, and sank slowly into sleep. Aldrich's fever broke 3 days later. Lord Cedric had watched everything from just outside the door. He said nothing. He gave no orders. It was not a reconciliation between enemies. It was a silent agreement between 2 people who had chosen, without words. to keep one man alive. As Aldrich recovered, the look in his eyes changed. The wild energy that had scorched the narrow room gave way to a stillness before a storm. The Lord does not look well. Aldrich's instincts were right. The city was already alive with dangerous whispers. They seeped over the garden walls and through the study door. The prince, they said, was dead, is alive. That night, Lord Cedric entered Aldrich's chamber. This place is no longer safe. Those who have caught wind of your existence are circling like hounds. I have prepared a shelter in the hills. We must leave at once. Aldrich looked out through the small window at the broken sky above. His gaze moved to Elara. Does she come with us? When Lord Cedric nodded, the last hesitation in Aldrich's eyes lifted. Then I will go. Wherever it is. They left before dawn, in the hour when no one stirs. Elara wore the plain dress of a common woman. Aldrich pulled a wide-brimmed hat low over his face and stepped in among the villagers. The long years in that narrow room had made his body powerful. But out on the open road, his stride was unsteady, uncertain of the space it was moving through. Elara said nothing. She simply adjusted her pace to match his. When the city gate fell behind them, and the open fields spread out ahead, Aldrich stopped. Beneath the brim of his hat, the line of his jaw trembled slightly. The sky is so wide. Yes. This is your world now. In the pale violet light of dawn, they mounted their horses. As the city shrank behind them and the mountains swallowed them whole, something strange and brilliant fell over their retreating forms. Like light through leaves. It was freedom. New and almost too bright to look at. When they arrived at the old cottage deep in the hills, Aldrich stood before it for a long time and could not move. Before him was not a strip of sky cut apart by walls. It was the sky itself, from one edge of the world to the other. A deep blue expanse with nothing in its way. Aldrich set his foot on bare earth. With the careful deliberateness of a newborn animal, the damp soil shifted under his weight. The firmness of the ground traveled up through his soles. It is solid. The ground is solid. His voice was barely steady. Elara saw the tremor and pretended she had not. Yes, my lord. The ground does not move. And so began their strange and quiet life together. For a man of royal blood who had never once lifted a hand to do any work. The daily life of the hills was a kind of warfare. He missed the logs on his first swing with the axe. He stumbled under the weight of the water carrier. It was frankly funny, but Elara did not tease him. She simply showed him how, quietly and without comment. One day, Aldrich paused in his wood chopping and turned to her, wiping sweat from his face. Why are you laughing? I was not laughing. Your lips just curled. A little. You were being rather endearing, my lord. The axe stopped. He did not answer. He brought it down hard on the next log. But his ears were burning red in the full summer heat. And there was nothing he could do about it. At night, they sat side by side and watched the sky pour out its stars. That one is called the goose star. My father used to say that if you follow it, you will find the ones you miss. Aldrich rested his chin on her shoulder and closed his eyes. Her voice threaded through the night air around his ear like something warm. Elara, I love this life terribly. He pressed his face against her shoulder. She set down her mending and took his rough hand in hers. The lamplight made one shadow out of two. One evening, Aldrich drew her close and sat her down before him. In his palm lay a small wooden ring, carved with clumsy but careful hands. I could not give you a proper ceremony. You knelt before a cold stone marker and spoke your vows to no one. That day has been lodged in me like a splinter ever since. His eyes were more serious than she had ever seen them. This is not gold or silver. But it is the mark that this hand belongs to my person. When the time comes, I will replace it with something worthy of you. But for now, will you take this? Elara slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled. This is more precious to me than all the treasure in the kingdom. Aldrich laughed out loud for the first time. After a while, he took her hand again. The hand with the ring. Elara. Yes. Tonight. Do not go. Elara looked at him. Aldrich did not look away. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, quietly. That night, by the low light of the lamp, the two of them became something more than two people sharing a name. They became each other's. It was before dawn when Elara opened her eyes first. A soft blue light was pressing through the rice paper of the window. She turned her head slightly, and found Aldrich already awake, watching her in silence. She could not say how long he had been lying there, keeping watch over her sleeping face. His large hand reached over and carefully swept her scattered hair aside. The fingers were calloused and rough from chopping wood and breaking earth. But they moved across each strand of her hair as though she were made of glass. As though the slightest carelessness might shatter something irreplaceable. There was a kind of terror in his touch. A terror of waking up and finding the dream gone. Elara opened her eyes slowly and met his gaze. His hand froze. He looked hurriedly at the ceiling and made a sound in his throat. You are awake. Yes, my lord. Go back to sleep. His voice was brisk and a little too firm. Elara pressed her lips together to hold back a laugh. When she closed her eyes again, his hand began to move through her hair once more. Slower and more careful than before. That plain, honest tenderness moved through her like warmth through cold stone. A few days later, on a morning full of good sun, Elara was shaking out the washing in the yard. The light lay gold across the side of her face and the curve of her neck. Aldrich sat on the step with his chin in his hand, staring at the scene in a kind of daze, until Elara glanced back and their eyes met. Why are you staring, my lord? Is there something on my face? Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, looking at nothing in particular. I was looking because you are too beautiful. Elara's hands stopped in the air. Aldrich had already turned his gaze to the distant hills. But his ears were burning fiercer than the midday sun. And they told the truth without any help from him. Elara stood still for a moment, not quite able to speak. Then she turned away behind the hanging laundry, and bit her lip to keep from smiling. Her cheeks were hotter than anything she had hung out to dry. The laundry moved faster in her hands than it needed to. And between the two of them, something sweeter than any flower was in full bloom. But happiness is like morning fog. Sweet and brief. One morning, as Elara was laughing over the scorched porridge Aldrich had made by mistake, his expression changed in an instant. He had moved to the edge of the yard and was staring down the hillside path. Through the low mist, the sound of hoofbeats rose. Not one horse. Many. the deep vibration of iron-shod warhorses and the presence of armed riders. Elara stepped out of the kitchen and stood beside him. They looked at each other. Behind them, the promise of the wooden ring. Before them, something immense was coming to collect its due. From the bottom of the hill path, Lord Cedric appeared at the head of a column of mounted soldiers, raising a cloud of dust. Lord Cedric came up the hill through the morning mist. He was wearing his court robes, which looked entirely out of place before a mud-walled cottage. Behind him, dozens of armored knights held their lances upright in formation. And at the rear of the column, a magnificent gilded carriage drew forward through the silence. Lord Cedric reached Aldrich and fell to his knees like a cliff giving way. The knights behind him lowered their weapons as one, and pressed their foreheads to the ground, before a man who had been splitting wood in a mountain cottage. The whole world was finally kneeling before its rightful owner. My liege, the time has come. The corrupt lords of the court attempted to seize the throne, but the king succumbed to illness before they could act, and the crown prince followed soon after. The court is now a battlefield without a master. Lord Cedric drew a long breath and produced from within his robes a small chest wrapped in golden cloth. I have spent decades bent low, gathering loyal men and building the foundation for this day. Within this chest is the sealed letter left by the late king. The only proof of your highness's blood. The time has come. Step out of the darkness. Aldrich looked down at Lord Cedric for a long moment. The man who had called himself a father but built a prison. Who had built a prison but guarded it with his life. Aldrich set aside the weight of that contradiction, and turned. Elara was there, in a plain dress, eyes bright and steady, standing exactly as she had stood the first night. He had slammed her against a wall in the dark. Aldrich walked through the rows of reverent soldiers and went to her. He held out his hand. Will you come with me? Are you not afraid? A palace is 1,000 times colder and more dangerous than this mountain. Aldrich closed his hand around hers with a grip that left no room for doubt. The Lord kept me alive. But you made me want to live. So I will walk willingly into those cold and suffocating palace walls. If it means keeping your hand safe. Before they reached the carriage, Lord Cedric stepped forward and spoke carefully. Your Highness, to seat a woman recorded in the royal papers as the daughter of a traitor. As the Queen will invite fierce opposition from the court. Perhaps it would be wiser to enter the palace first, and then consider this matter in time. Aldrich stopped walking. A cold and terrible stillness radiated from him and settled over the Lord's bowed head. You are telling me to leave Elara behind. Lord Cedric could not answer. He kept his head down. Aldrich turned back, his voice quiet and contemptuous. Then I will not go. What use is a throne to me without a person? There is no King Aldrich without Elara. Silence fell across the entire hillside. Lord Cedric trembled, and pressed his forehead to the ground. I will stake everything I have. I will restore her family's name and clear the charge against her father. I will keep the place of Queen empty until she stands in it. Aldrich helped Elara into the carriage first, then looked back at the Lord. The debt you owe is not mine to forgive. That belongs to Elara, but I will not forget that without you, I would not be here at all. The carriage began its descent. Lord Cedric was left alone on the hillside. He bowed again and again toward the retreating carriage. as it shrank into the valley below. The man who had lived his entire life inside secrets and strategies wept for the first time. The tears fell freely, clear and hot. At the end of that winter, a new king was crowned. The king's first decree sent the court into an uproar. He named Elara as his queen. The assembled lords and ministers buzzed like a disturbed hive. But the king's eyes were cold enough and steady enough to hold every one of them still. The second decree followed. The charge of treason laid against the queen's father was struck from all records. The honor of her family was to be restored and announced before the entire kingdom. The Lord kept me alive. And that woman made me wish to stay alive. Only one person in that hall understood the full weight of those words. The woman who had first heard the sound of his breathing through a wall. Who had walked through a hidden passage and opened a locked door. Who had entered that dark place as the wife of the dead. And become everything to a living king. Aldrich rose slowly from the throne and extended his hand. It was not a royal command. It was what it had always been, since the day they stood together. Watching a flower bloom in a small enclosed yard. It was a man asking to be held. Asking her to stay. Telling her that he could not breathe without her. Elara walked forward and took the king's hand. Beneath the fine gold ring of a queen, hidden where no one could see, was a rough and small wooden ring. Its uneven surface pressed gently against her finger, warm and familiar. All the splendor of the kingdom lived in that throne. But Elara's entire world lived in the palm of the king's hand. That was enough. Thank you so much for spending this night with Midnight Fox Tales. Like Aldrich, who grew a flower even in a sealed room. Like Elara, who never stopped reaching her hand into the dark. I hope a spring like that finds its way to your life someday. No matter how long the winter has been. Have you ever kept yourself locked away, like Aldrich? Or have you ever reached out first, like Elara? Because you simply could not keep pretending you had not noticed? I would love to hear what is on your heart tonight. Leave a comment and let me know. I read every single one. Subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications keeps this storyteller going. Rest well tonight. Until next time. Good night.